Anyone who's ever done anything worth doing has dreamed big, failed mightily, and mostly started from humble beginnings. This is a podcast about such people. The most fascinating podcast in the world is fascinating because of the stories of the human beings. Hello, everybody. It's Pat DeCerbo, the most fascinating podcast in the world. Has nothing to do with me and everything to do with the folks who agree to talk to me. And today we have a fascinating character. His name is Rodney Schultz. And Rod has done many, many things, which I will not list and we will talk about in the course of our conversation. But I'm delighted to have Rod here, and welcome, Rod.
Thank you so much, Pat. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. So as you know, I'm in the habit of asking people about their earliest memories, like where they grew up and so on and so forth. So would it be all right if we start there with your earliest memories?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in a little town that was famous for the Pony Express, originating in St. Joseph, Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
Also, apparently, Aunt Jemima pancakes was founded there as well. Aunt Jemima syrup, I think it is.
Aunt Jemima, is she still living?
I don't think so. I don't think so. But it's a middle of farm country. Quaker Oats used to have a big plant there. I think they still do. But my earliest memories of St. Joe was I have 5 brothers and a sister. All of the boys are in electrical contracting. My sister went to Notre Dame, graduated in finance, and she's been a finance director for huge companies, Yellow Freight and folks like that. So all 6 of us have been relatively successful in our careers. A lot of that is based on how my dad and mom raised us. My dad is a Great Depression child. My grandparents literally started Schultz Electric in 1933. And it was amazing stories to hear my grandmother tell that Grandpa Schultz would go out on a service call, get on the streetcar, material in one hand, tools in another, and come home with a chicken for payment. That's how they lived. That's how people bartered services back in those days. And they basically grew their company to a 4th generation company now. I left and really never went back after college days because I didn't like the cold. I always liked the warm and the ocean, which is why I've lived in California. Texas, I've lived in Texas. I still have a home there. We're only an hour and a half from Galveston, but my true home now is in Tampa. And so we've been here for quite a while, and my wife's moving back. We because of the position I took in Texas 2.5 years ago, it required me to move to Houston.
Mm-hmm.
But now because I'm taking over these 2 sister companies we bought, it allowed us to now move back to what we consider home at the end of the day. But circling back, the earliest childhood memories, great little town, St. Joseph, Missouri, 78,000 people. And the big company called Herzog Construction, and is now a multi-billion-dollar company, is based in St. Joe. If you guys see line trucks running all over the place, the bucket trucks, that's Altec Industries. They got a massive manufacturing plant in St. Joe. It's roughly an hour north of Kansas City. So, it's not a big deal to get in the car and go down to Kansas City for a nice dinner, see the Chiefs, see the Royals, what have you. But I was about ready to tell you a lot of my fond memories is things that people have told me about my dad. And talk about a fascinating guy. Electrician, made, I think he said made when he started the apprenticeship somewhere in the 50s. He was making 35 cents an hour, and married and so forth and so on. And I think when he topped out at 4 years later, he's making like $1.80 at the end of the day. Not a whole lot of money in those days. But in any event, he built this foundation for 6 kids to live their life on. And I got to tell you, hats off to him and my mom. The family company does well over $100 million now, based out of Kansas City. I work for companies that are well north of $100 million. Rosie, my sister, obviously she works for public companies. So they've done well bringing us out of a small little town of 76,000 people. But my dad was an avid outdoorsman.
Mm-hmm.
And when he wasn't working, we would hardly ever see him unless we were at a sporting event. All of us kids played sports.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but back in those days, Pat, you had basically three choices: football, baseball, and basketball. That was all we had. So we all got pretty proficient in those sports. But Dad would always show up kind of like the Phil Robertson scenario in Duck Dynasty. He either had bird feathers on him or something, because he was always either hunting birds or hunting deer or hunting something. And we had a farm in northwest Missouri. And the way the story goes is that he was with one of his general contractors. We were subcontractors as electrical contractors. He was he was with a general contractor customer. And they were up on his farm, and it happened to rain the day before, but they were wanting to deer hunt. And the only way to get to deer hunt was to go through this little valley, which had a knoll on both sides and then a kind of a valley in between. And he pulled up on the valley, and it was flooded out, but it had a lot of corn stalks still on it. And his customer said, "Well, I'm not going to walk through that, Roger, because we probably just get ourselves stuck and not have an enjoyable day." And he said, "Don't worry, I've done this before. We're going to jump it." So,
in his car?
In his Jimmy, yes.
Man.
Back in those days, it was in the 70s. So it was a Jimmy. I can still see this Jimmy before. It's a yellow body, white top.
How far across is this?
It was about somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 120 feet.
We're going to jump.
It was a big jump. And so it was like a gulch more than anything. So the customer says, "You're not jumping this with me in it. I'm getting out." So he gets out. And the way the story goes, my dad backs up about 200 feet and then floors it. Well, it went up and then went nosedive right into the mud pit. And I'll put it to you this way. It took him a while to get out because you have to get the record. And Mom was not happy because that was one of 2 vehicles that they had. And he just nosed it into a mud pit about 3 feet. So,
how did he get out? I'm surprised he didn't die.
So, one of the interesting things, and there's no seatbelts in those days.
Right.
So, but he's a big, tough guy. And he, apparently, the way the story goes, he literally opened the side door, crawled out on the side of it, and somehow slopped his way back to the edge. And then had to call a wrecker to come tow him out.
Oh,
and so those are similar stories that I can tell. I can go on for hours. People have told me stories that he's done. And, one day he was out bird hunting in the same Jimmy, by the way. And no, excuse me. He was deer hunting. And they call it Arkansas hunting up in the northwest Missouri area, where you're riding around in a truck. And instead of sitting in a deer stand, you're riding around in a truck. And then you see a deer. And next thing you know, you point your rifle out the window and take your shot, because it gets cold up there, as you probably
right know. Is that legal?
Joe Nye, I know you know Joe. Joe knows as many stories, if not more, than I do about my dad. And so one day he got excited. He saw a big buck and he slams on the brakes. But the problem is he had his hand on the he had his finger on the trigger. And when he slammed on the brakes, he blew out the rear window.
Oh my gosh!
And thank goodness he was with him by himself. But you can just imagine the stories and the sentiments that my mother would have with him when he would come home and tell these stories and what he did. She was not a happy camper a lot of the time. But
good thing there was no one in the back seat, right?
Thank goodness there was no one in the back seat, no one in the car. I'm surprised he even told the story. But he had to come up with something, how he blew out the back window. But
Right.
with my dad, it is what it is. I blew out the back window. Shouldn't have had my hand on the trigger, but all that kind of stuff with him. But
Right.
St. Joe's a wonderful little town. Joe Nib is a person that represents St. Joe very well.
Mm-hmm.
Heart of the it's in the heart of the country, and good people.
How
And
did you
so I
all
grew
meet?
up. What's that?
How did you all meet, you and Joe?
Joe Nib was with Herzog Construction, and so
Mm-hmm.
Herzog and was started by Bill Herzog, and my
Mm-hmm.
grandparents, Dorothy and Nick, they started these two companies about the same time. In terms of really getting out there and doing commercial stuff. Now, my grandparents started a little bit earlier than Bill, but Bill wasn't too far behind him. And they
Mm-hmm.
just built these two companies together, and they have these Joe and the Herzogs and the Schultzes have hunting camps and all this stuff together. And so, hunting is a big thing in the Midwest, as you probably will know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where a lot of the camaraderie goes. My brother Ryan, who's basically a very smart guy, he's an electrician, but he's also now an executive and an owner of one of the companies or multiple companies of the family. Basically, when September comes through the end of the year, Ryan is doing nothing but sitting in duck blinds and marketing with customers, as I understand.
Mm-hmm.
When January comes, he goes with customers or a customer's house in the Keys for about a month, marketing. Then 2 or 3 months later, he's out fishing and down to Costa Rica and all that kind of stuff. And then now he's got all this work, and so now he has to deliver it, as I understand it. And so he and my brother Rick is really the brain trust behind the latest version of the Schultz Electric. It's called RS Electric Corporation. And Rick is a guy who had a passion for success and an urgency for success. And when he got his hands on the reins of the company, boy, did he really take off with it. Has done a great job. And, hats off to Rick. He's really built a great organization, very respectful. They're in multiple cities, multiple states. And, like I said, they're over $100 million now doing all kinds of work, data centers, line building. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, when the hurricane came through and hit Puerto Rico, I believe it was not too long ago, probably 10 years ago, they actually sent line crews over to Puerto Rico to help rebuild the infrastructure there. So he's done a really good job. And but it's fascinating because he and I both went to Arizona State. He was in construction science, I was in nuclear engineering,
Mm-hmm.
but he didn't mind going back to the Midwest, as I understand it, because of the coal. He had an ambition to succeed and build his own company. Boy, did he really build a company. Pretty proud of him, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. It
But
sounds
I'm
like
proud, I'm proud of all my brothers because Roger Jr., there's always this dynamic between union and non-union. Well, Roger Jr. decided, my dad's Roger Sr.
Mm-hmm.
He decided that he wasn't going to be a union contractor anymore. He was going to be a non-union contractor. So he goes to Kansas City and opens up his own non-union company. Well, when the union found out about it, as the story goes, they firebombed his office, destroyed it. But he just decided that, you know what, you're not gonna intimidate me, and he cleaned it all up and started all over again, and then got some of the largest contracts with Sprint. Remember Sprint back in the day, and Nextel,
sure. Mm-hmm.
and built his organization separate and apart from Rick's organization. And Rick and Ryan have RS, and then Roger had Schultz Brothers, and they kind of built these companies. Not kind of, they did build their companies on their own smarts and their own relationships, and like I said, just hats off to them at the end of the day. But long story short, the folks are still alive, believe it or not. They're 89. They just celebrated their 70th wedding anniversary.
What's your mom's name?
Rosa Anna, and then Roger Sr. And mom had already put out the notice a year ago that marked this date, I think it was October 19th. It was a Sunday. were having the celebration, which we did at St. Joe Country Club. And they had all but 11 of their 39 grandchildren show up. And so, because there's for different reasons. But the primary family, my brothers and sisters, we were all there. And it was a nice event to see everybody. But Dad, he knows more about construction, what everybody's doing, or at least he professes he does in St. Joe. And he's still active, sharp as a tack, Mom sharp as a tack. And once you get contracting in your blood, contracting's in your blood, I guess. So that kind of gives you a little bit about where I come from.
And Rick and Ryan are still running RS?
Rick and Ryan are still running RS. They are getting ready to transition, particularly Rick, because Rick's the majority owner of it. And it's interesting because my brother Reed is an attorney, and I believe his title is the president. He became the president. And then my nephew, Rick's son, is an attorney. So, and my niece, Rick's daughter, is also in the business. She's a physician's assistant, but has made the jump from medical to construction. So the bottom line of all this is my uncle and my dad and my grandparents said, if you want to come into the business, you got two paths. One is going through the trade, the IBEW, to get a electrician's ticket, or you're going to go to a 4-year accredited college and get a degree. That was the only two paths that me and my siblings were given to become part of the company. So Ryan, fourth in line, he went through the trade. All the rest of us went to college. Took the college route.
So you spent your early years in St. Joe's, and you decided, it sounds to me like you were a good student in high school.
Well, unfortunately, I was a smart guy, but I was in love with sports.
Okay.
So I was arguably one of the first football players in high school, state of Missouri, to be all-state in 2 different positions back in the mid-'70s. And so my dad always wanted us to either be doctors or professional athletes. So I took the college route, and as a freshman, got a scholarship. I had opportunities to go to Arkansas, Kansas, and a bunch of other schools around the Midwest. And Coach Onofrio, I don't know if you remember Al Onofrio, at University of Missouri. He came up, talked to me for a long time, and said, "Rod, I got my linebacker core already in place," because I was a linebacker at the time, the size of a linebacker, and I want you to go to Missouri Western, which is right up the road from the house, and it's a good college, and I want you to grow. I want you to get stronger. I was always strong, and he said, and as long as you make 1 on the depth chart, and I was a freshman, remember this, and as long as you make number 1 on the depth chart, I'm going to transfer you here for spring ball with a full scholarship. And I said, okay, that sounds like a deal. Talked to Mom and Dad. They were elated because they can watch me play right down the street. But the problem was I was a freshman and I was 3 on the depth chart. So I had to work my way up to number 1, which I eventually finally did. Believe it or not, I finally got to number 1, and I got the starting middle linebacker position the very last game of the season. And unfortunately for me, I met a fullback running full speed as I was head on. And back in those days, Pat, head-to-head contact was normal. And so he got up, and I laid there numb from the neck down. And so, it's kind of interesting that your family, your mom and dad are in the stands, your girlfriend's in the stands, and you're laying there on the field motionless. Just 2 weeks before that, a high school player in St. Joe at Benton High School had a neck injury too, and he died. So you got that in my mom and dad's mind, and thinking, oh my God, what's going on here? And so finally, the ambulance came, hauled me off to the hospital, and for the next 11 hours, I was trying. They were trying to get me some feelings so they could at least know where the problem was. Now, bear in mind, I had all my pads on, all my cleats and everything, so they had to just basically tear everything off of me. But as it turned out, I pinched my spinal cord severely, and plus cracked my neck in a number of places that was not conducive to a long-term career. And the most fascinating thing about that whole experience, although it was scary at the time for everybody, was and this is an away game. The team would not go home. It was a 3.5-hour bus trip. They would not leave until I was walking out of that hospital, or they had gotten word that I was going to be admitted overnight. So they literally finished the game, sat on the bus for about 7 hours, and I finally got enough feeling in my body that I asked the doctor if I could get released and go to a hospital in St. Joe. And they said, well, if your feeling's coming back, you need to go somewhere where you're going to get stabilized. And so they wheeled me out in a wheelchair. Some of the football players helped me up into the seat, and then we went home that night.
That's crazy.
And but that ended my football career.
Mm.
And so I had no other choice but to get a degree or go to work somehow.
Mm-hmm. So you transferred to ASU?
So at that time, I decided, my dad said, why don't you just, because of the neck injury, I didn't want to give up. I'm going to just tell you a story. I didn't want to give up. I didn't want to go to ASU at that time because for a number of reasons, but I didn't want to give up the dream. So, but when you have that kind of an injury and you don't train and you don't work out and you lay around and lay in the bed for three months or so, you lose a lot of strength, and plus it takes a lot out of you. I told him I want to go and try to do a walk-on at Missouri. Well, unfortunately, Al Onofrio was fired, and Warren Powers came in from Washington State, and Powers talked to me. He said, I know what your deal was. I would like to honor it, but the problem is, he says, I'm bringing the portal wasn't even available at that time. Mm-hmm. He said, but I'm transferring the guys I want, and the majority of them are the linebackers. He said, but if you can make 2 on the depth chart at spring training or at spring camp, I'll give you a half of a scholarship. So, scholarships were big at those days. They still are to a certain degree. So I told my dad and mom, I want to transfer to Missouri, check it out, see what I can do. And this is when guys like Phil Bradley, I don't know if you remember that name, baseball player for Seattle, Ken Bologna, a lot of big guys, a lot of big names. Kellen Winslow. Sure. I don't know if you heard of that guy.
Of course.
Those are all the guys that were at Missouri at the time. And so spring training opened, spring ball opened. And I did my hardest. I tried for 2 weeks, and I was so far behind the rest of the camp. There was no way I was going to make second string. So I called my dad, and he said, you know what, you're going to have a tough time having a football for dinner. You might as well go get your degree and get into the business. Well, at that time, the company was starting to flourish, and it made sense for us to start working our way into the business. So that's when I decided to transfer to Arizona State in the nuclear engineering program.
What made you decide on nuclear engineering?
Well, at the time, and that's a fascinating story. My dad was obviously in Schultz Electric was electrical, and I always was fascinated with chemistry, physics, the whole molecular world, structure world. And I told my dad, I said, Dad, I think I want to get nuclear engineering. I said, you got 3 Mile Island, you got all kinds of power coming up, projects and out in Washington and all that. He goes, what? Typical dad, because he was an electrician. He didn't go to college. He goes, what the hell are you going to do with that, son? I said, hopefully make a lot of money someday. And he said, well, he said, if that's what you want to do, that's what you're doing. Let's go figure it out. So I actually transferred out there, and the head of the department was a guy named Dr. McLevin, and fascinating guy there. So he showed a picture one day of his house, and it was all photovoltaic cells, PV cells, solar panels.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, "This is the future. This is where uh, the industry and power generation is going to be in 30 years. But it's going to take at least 30 years before it can be commercially viable." And, here we are today, and you got PV panels going up all over the place. But unfortunately, it's been 50 years before it's got reasonably commercially available. But then 2 years into the program, because I'd already had a year of college, so it was a 5-year program. 3 Mile Island. I don't know if y'all. Rich is probably too young to remember 3 Mile Island, but you may not be, Pat. The valve stuck on the cooling system, and remember, oh my God, everything. The Nuclear Regulatory Agency. Everybody just went nuts, and that's when all the nuclear programs got shut down in the United States. I don't know if you guys remember all that.
What year was that?
1979,
Mm-hmm.
79 and 80.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's 78 of us in the program, and Dr. McLevin brought us in one at a time and said, because we were all at different levels within the program. And he said, "Rod," he said, "you're a year and a half from graduating." He said, "But I'm going to tell you, there's not going to be any jobs available." He says, "You really got 3 choices." And he said, "You can stick it out and get a degree, figure out where the market's going to be or the industry's going to be in a couple of years. You can stick around and get your graduate degree and even give it more time, or you can transfer and get a degree that at least there's jobs waiting for you, and or transfer into a different discipline of engineering." And so of all 78 of us, only 2 stuck it out and went to their MBA, went on to get their MBA or master's, not MBA, but their master's. And the rest of us all decided to go get a different type of degree, which I did. I ended up getting a business degree at the time because my dad and my uncle flew out. And after I told my dad, they literally both flew out and said, "All right, we spent enough money, we spent enough time. We're growing the business. You need to get your degree and get back and get here." And so I said, "Well, what kind of degree you want me to get?" And they said, "Look, you can be an engineer, but your job is not going to be designing systems. Your job is going to be project managing. Eventually you'll be running some type of division. You need to have a business background." I said, "I don't have a business background." They said, "Exactly. You need to get a business background because you got to understand how to manage a business." I got to tell you, that was probably the best advice I had gotten from those 2, because having the business background, I went back to University of Missouri. It was in Kansas City, UMKC, and had some great teachers, because at UMKC, they pull professors from Black and Beach, from all the big corporations that are in Kansas City. And they bring those professors in as adjunct professors. And then you literally are being taught by industry professionals. And that was the second smart choice I made at the day. And, I look back, what is it, 40 years ago, 40 some years ago, and felt, that's pretty, I had some pretty good luck there, Pat, at the end of the day.
Mm. So how long did you stay with the family company?
So once, your program is titled appropriately when we talk about fascinating things. To me, it's fascinating because I lasted 13 months.
Mm.
Got a call from one of my friends and one of my fraternity brothers. I was a Fidel at Arizona State, and said, "Hey, he's working for a general contractor. And he says, I got an electrical contractor that needs a project manager. Are you interested in coming to California?" And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, well, I want to get out of the cold. I love the Southwest. I said, what's his name? So long story short, I get the interview. We were at 2 hours on the phone. And he said, I'm going to send you an airplane ticket. Can you come out in the next week or two? So I said, sure. Didn't tell my dad anything. Didn't tell my dad or my uncle what I was doing. So I fly out. His name was Larry Arnett, Prince of a Gentleman. And we literally met. He showed me the project. It was the Biltmore Hotel. I don't know if you've ever seen downtown L.A. and the Biltmore Hotel. The Bonaventure's right up the street.
Mm-hmm.
And what's fascinating about the Biltmore Hotel, that's where Beverly Hills Cop was filmed. A whole bunch of iconic movies were filmed in that hotel. And Ghostbusters was filmed in that hotel, the original Ghostbusters.
Mm-hmm.
So his contract was to renovate the electrical, all 1,440 rooms. It was a 14-story building, 3 wings. It had the colonnade, which is where all the ballrooms were, all that stuff. And at the time, believe it or not, it was the largest. The general contract was $250 million. And back in that day, it was the largest commercial project at the time other than the Getty Museum. And so, and the Getty Museum, as you know, I don't even know if they finished it yet. It just went on and on and on. So he and I talked for about 3 hours. We had lunch, and he goes, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, it's a great opportunity, and I'd love to come to work for you." So we literally made an arrangement and got to a price and package and all that. And I said, and this was like June, late May, early June. I said, "Okay, when do you want me to start?" He said, "As soon as you can." I said, "Well, it's going to take me a couple months to get out here and get acclimated." He says, "Okay, I'll see you in August." And I said, "Okay, that's good enough." Well, I never talked to Larry until I walked in the door on August, I think it was 7th or 8th.
Mm-hmm.
This is back in 84, 83, 84. And so I told my dad, I walked in, I said, "Dad, thanks for the opportunity." Now remember, I've only been there for 14 months.
Mm.
"Thanks for the opportunity, but I think I'm going to stretch my wings and go to California." Well, you can just imagine how that went over. And so, your future's here, blah, blah, all that kind of stuff. And I said, "Dad, one, I don't like the weather here. Two, I really like the Southwest, and I really want to go out and try this on my own." And so once I got out there, I took over the project management for the hotel, and never looked back. I just love the warm weather. Then I transferred and did a couple of big projects in Phoenix at the corner of 24th and Camelback. It's called the Esplanade Project, right across from the Biltmore Plaza. Did that complex, and then from there.
You mean the Arizona Biltmore?
The Arizona Biltmore, yeah. That
Okay,
whole complex.
as opposed to the Los Angeles Biltmore?
As opposed to the Los Angeles Biltmore. That's correct. And so don't ask me how I kept getting into hospitality and retail, but I did. And so there was a gentleman by the name of Bob Dorn, who's an interesting guy. He was the president of NECA, National Electrical Contractors Association. It's got 4,000 members. And he knew my dad because they were semi-competitors in the electrical business out of Kansas City. And one day they had met and just going through the families, what everybody was doing. And then they came to me, and Dad said, "Well, Rod's over in Arizona now, building big projects." And Bob said, I need a senior project man. I need a skilled project manager because we just got the General Motors Fairfax plant." And he said, "Well, I can call him and see if he's interested in moving." Well, about that time, I just got married to my wife, Mary Ann. We'll be celebrating 39 years here in May.
How do you spell Mary Ann?
Mary, and then Ann.
Thank you.
And
congratulations.
Thanks. And I said to her, I said, "You met my mom and dad." She goes, "Yeah, I really like them. Your dad's a character." And I said, "Yeah, he sure is." I said, "What do you think about moving to Kansas City?" And she goes, "Have you lost your mind?" I said, "No, I've got a good job opportunity." She's a nurse. She was a traveling nurse, and she always told me I can get a job anywhere, which she could have. And she did. And so I said, it's more money. I said, if we don't like the Midwest, we can always come back.
Did you
And
forget it was cold in Missouri at that
well,
point?
yeah, you might want to say I got blinded by the money. And
Okay.
so I come back, went to work for Bob, and spent the next 8 years there building casinos and Lewis Rich turkey plants and all kinds of big stuff for him. Then all of a sudden I get a call when I was out in Dresden, Missouri, which is 2 hours from Kansas City. He goes, Rodney, I need you in my office 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, which was a Saturday, in Leavenworth. Can you be here? And I said, well, you're the boss. I'll be there. And he goes, I got a problem. So I got there Saturday morning. He goes, I got a problem company. He was buying companies and stuff. And he had bought a company, electrical contracting company in Colorado called Collier Electric, one of the oldest electrical contractors at the time, union contractor. And he told me the story, why he did it. And he said, we do a lot of airport work, which they did at Kansas City International Airport. And he said, Governor Romer has announced that he's going to get preferential treatment to in-state contractors. And I want part of that new Denver International Airport. At the time, Stapleton, I don't know if you remember that, Pat, but Stapleton Airport was the main airport in Denver.
Okay.
Denver International was the new airport that they built in the early 90s. And so I said, okay, so what do you need me to do, Bob? And he goes, well, I'm just bleeding money out there. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, we bought the thing in 88. I've hired now 4 operations managers. I'm still not making any money. We got tens of millions of dollars in contracts with DIA contractors. And I need you to go out there and ascertain what's going on. I don't want you to fire anybody, yell at anybody. I just want you to come back and give me your perspective from an operational point of view. And I said, okay. And so he goes, by the way, I'm taking Stan Bennett, our CFO. He's going with you. So you guys can review the financials on the airplane. And to me, it was pretty obvious what the problem was. They weren't billing and they weren't collecting. They were doing the work and incurring the cost, but they weren't billing and collecting. Well, it didn't surprise me much on the reason why they weren't doing it, because if we walk in the building and the controller walks up to me, shakes my hand, says hi, and says, hey, I wish I could spend more time with you, but get this, Pat. Rocky's inaugural opening day is today, and I got tickets, so I got to go.
Rocky the movie?
No, the Colorado Rockies.
Oh, okay. Rockies. Forgive me. Baseball.
Yeah, the Rockies.
Got it.
And I said, well, it is what it is. I'll be here tomorrow. And so he did his deal, and I went and talked to the operations guy and kind of got a flavor of what he's doing. Well, it was interesting because he had nothing to do with the accounting, and the accounting guys had nothing to do with operations. So there's this big divide. There was never any type of cross-pollination. So that was my first big red flag. So the next morning comes, and here comes the guy around 9 o'clock, which is odd, but that's okay. And we just went through everything, and so Stan says to me, "I'm going back. You going back with me today?" And I said, "No, give me another day or two here. I want to get more in depth with what's going on. Bob's going to put me through the ringer when I get there on Saturday, that following Saturday." So I spent another day there, and I got to tell you, Pat, you got $28 million worth of backlog. You have really no operational support from the administrative side of things. You got good field people, excellent field people, but they got no support from the office and all this kind of stuff. The things you absolutely need as a contractor. And so I go back and sit down with Bob on that Saturday morning, and he goes, "All right, give it to me." I said, 4 options. He goes, 4 options? I said, yeah. You need to find somebody to sell it to. You need to find somebody to merge it with. You need to shut it down, or you need to pump another $8 million into it and find somebody that can actually run it. And he gave me an expletive. That ain't no blanking option. Those aren't any blanking options that are good. And so we need to figure this out. I'm sitting there, Pat, thinking to myself, and because at that time I was finishing up the Lewis Ridge plant. I was in the middle of developing, at the time, Kansas City's largest airlift at the Bendix plant, which is a 3.5 million square foot non-nuclear Department of Energy facility. What I mean by airlift, have you seen they're Sikorsky's? They look like firefly, or the spider flies, the big fireflies. I don't know, they're orange. You see a lot of them in wildfires where they're dumping chemicals on the fires. Well, they have a 25,000 pound lift capacity, and they were exactly what I needed, because what we were doing is there was 26 of these penthouses scattered throughout this 3.5 million square foot facility. Well, what we had to do is we had to go in as part of our contract, cut a 10 by 10 hatch, and all the steel, all the fabrication, and put a hatch on top of it. Once the hatch was done, there had to be a removable hatch. Then you have this double-ended switchgear. And part of a double-ended switchgear is you have these massive transformers that have PCB. I assume you know what PCB is all about. So part of all this decontamination and so forth and so on had to be coordinated. We had to do it in 2 phases because it was double-ended. And so you had to take one end out in October. You had to take the other end out in March. That was the schedule. And so between closing down Lewis Ridge, starting this project up with all the coordination that had to be done with the Department of Energy and all that, and before you can even step foot in that facility, you have to go through a Q clearance, which is a security clearance. And then if you're not using your badge in 90 days, you go to an L clearance. And so you had to go, all the crews had to go through all this kind of stuff. So in any event, Bob says to me, he goes, I'm going to get you some help, but I think you're going out there. So I said, okay. Now bear in mind, I had a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and my wife just gave birth to my daughter. And I said, okay, Bob, he knew Marianne, knew her well, that Marianne liked him, and all that kind of stuff. And I said, all right, you and I can figure out the work part, but I got to figure out the family part of it. He goes, well, it's going to take some time away from the family. And I said, that's the problem. And I said, but I'll figure it out. I'm going to figure it out because I want this opportunity. I never said no to opportunities like this for whatever reason, Pat. And so I went home. My wife just started going back to work, and they're on 3 12-hour shifts. And so but she was a trooper. Marianne is a trooper, and she said, well, we got to do what we got to do. And so I would literally leave on Monday morning and on the early flight, and then come back Friday afternoon. And that's what I did for 3.5 years. And we basically shut the company down in 3.5 years. He wanted to liquidate it. He didn't want to sell it because he knew he wasn't going to get value for it. So I ended up flying back and forth. At the same time, when I had to do the airlift, I wouldn't go out there. I'd have to coordinate with the airlift. And then we eventually shut it all down. But while we were out there, what was interesting is Bendix was adopting total quality management. Now, I'm sure you heard of TQM and lean production and all that kind of stuff. Well, as a subcontractor to Bendix people, we had to be TQM trained and certified. So my entire crew had to go through a week of TQM training, which is all movements with the hands and the feet and efficiency and all that kind of stuff. And so I said, okay. Now remember, circling back, I said Bob was the national president of NECA. Well, in order to do that, Bob came up with a platform in early 1990s, and it was the blueprint of the 90s. At that time, the union industry, union contracting had gone down from like the mid 40s to the mid 30s, mid 20s. This is in the Midwest. And by the time Bob became president, it was less than 20% union, where all the union work. So his platform is to get union contracting growing again. And he decided, because he went through the TQM program himself, he thought that if I can do a TQM program and institute that with the IBEW for efficiencies, contractors could make more money. There'd be more union contractors coming in, blah, blah, blah. And so he calls me up one day. I'll never forget it. I was at the trailer at Bendix. He said, "Hey, what do you know about TQM?" I said, "Other than what we were trained at Bendix," I said, "not much more than that." He goes, "Well, you better figure it out, because now you're going to be my architect for developing the TQM program for NECA." I'm like, so I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I'm still in the middle of closing down the operation in Denver. And we got this massive airlift going on at Bendix. And so, I said, "Okay, Bob, let me figure this out." So in the meantime, what we had done is we were buying all kinds of products from certain companies. And one of the companies at the time, have you ever heard of the name Walker Wire Mold, the underfloor duct and all those? They do all the underfloor duct work. Well, now they used to do duct work, but now you have raised floors, so all the duct work is irrelevant. But they were out of West Virginia. So the area rep he and I were developing some product for one of the jobs I was doing besides Bendix. And he goes, "Have you ever thought about," because I was telling him about total quality and I had to put this program together and all this kind of stuff. He goes, "You ever thought about going to Gaifu, Japan and studying under the Shinjitsu group?" And I said, "You're talking way foreign to me here." He goes, "Look, it's probably one of the most fascinating programs if you really want to get into lean production and efficiency and all that kind of stuff." Well, in the meantime, I'm getting books like the Machine That Changed the World, which is the Toyota production system. I'm reading about W. Edwards Deming. I'm reading about Joseph Duran. All these guys about efficiencies and so forth and so on. And trying to get educated as best I could, because I didn't want to let Bob down. And so I just mustered up the courage and I said, "Bob, do you mind if I go to Japan and study the Toyota production system?" I thought he was going to kick me out of his office. That was my first impression. He goes, "How much is it going to cost?" I said, "Well, Walker Wire Mold will split the cost with us since we're doing so much work with it." And he literally said, "That's fine with me. Schedule it. Go." So Walker Wire Mold literally flew me out there first class. We stopped over in Seattle and went to Japan, and then flew me back first class. And we spent I don't know how many days and weeks out there, but it was a fascinating it was a fascinating experience. At that time you had the Canadians there, you had Germans there, you had some Chinese there, but not a lot, because China and Japan really didn't get along. Still don't, I don't think. But you had South Koreans there, and so you put the air cuff on, and you have all the presentations. Well, one of the disciples who started the Toyota production system, his name's Dr. Ono. He literally gave the initial presentation. He was a fascinating guy. Couldn't speak a lick of anything other than Japanese, but man, you're sitting there talking to the guy who's one of the first creators of the Toyota production system. And I got my picture taken with him. And so anyway, I learned all this stuff and came back, and I said, "Bob," I said, "I don't know who wants to go, but that was a fascinating trip." And I said, "We got a whole bunch of work ahead of us to clean up our operation." He goes, what are you talking about?" So I told him, and I said, "Bob, if you look at our estimates, we could literally pick up 25% of our labor at any given time." He goes, that's impossible." And so most of the electrical industry, like mechanical, there's a standard of estimating on for units of installation, whether it's per 100, per 1,000, per each. And it's all based upon average. And a lot of this comes from NECA. because that's where they get the data from the NECA contractors and publish this book. And I told him, I said, Bob, those units, the way I see it, are pumped by 25%. We can clearly pick up 25. Now, Bob at this time was almost a $100 million company. About 30 to 32 million of that is labor. So he did the math. It's pretty quick. He could pick up $7.5 million worth of labor by instituting a program of lean production. We were one of the first companies in the entire country to do lean production. And now, it's a whole industry. But Capital Electric Companies was one of the first companies in the United States to do lean production. It wasn't called lean production at the time. We had to drop the management part, believe it or not, of total quality because the unions had to buy into it, Pat. And if there was management attached, the little word management attached to the description, they would have nothing to do with it. So we ended up going for total quality. But I said to Bob, I said, total quality is a Western/American description. These guys talk about world-class quality. And at the time, GE and Jack Welch, Six Sigma, all that kind of stuff was coming around. ISO 9000 was coming around. But these were all Western culture manufacturers. And the Japanese, they fought ISO 9000. They didn't think, because in their whole world, MUDA, MUDA, waste, is the ultimate enemy. So Six Sigma, ISO 9000, those types of standards accept waste. And so Japanese guys, the Japanese culture is saying, why do we want to embrace something that incorporates things that we want to get rid of? So long story short, the Western manufacturers, the Western culture manufacturers, basically, in order to compete with Japan, said, Japan, if you want to provide products to us, you got to meet ISO 9000 standards. They acquiesced and eventually started doing that. I think that's all. That ISO 9000 now has pretty much gone away. But long story short, we put the program together. I got through the airlifts. We sat down with the IBEW, and the IBEW says, we're not taking the risk for this. You're going to have to take the risk for it. So Bob, being a maverick, said, oh, that's no problem. He picked a school, a very large school that we did. Now, most contractors can't make $1 on school, especially schools built of masonry. It's just too labor intensive. And he says, if we can make money on that school, he says the program will work. Well, it was a 2.5-year contract, a 2-year contract. So the IBEW put a committee together. We put a committee. We put my team together, and we went ahead and moved forward with it. And at the end of the day, it was so successful, made money. There's NECA has Electrical Contractor Magazine, which is a nationwide magazine. They literally came out in December 1990. They published it in 1995. The article about us, what we did. We were on the front page of it, the front cover, and we started getting calls. Bob started getting calls and said, "Hey, can you show us how you do it?" And Bob said, "I can't show you how to do it. Number one, I don't have time, and number two, I don't have the expertise the guy at the tip of the spear on the cover has." And they literally said, "Bob, can we hire him to come out and help us?" So that was in the mid 90s. And that was my first introduction to Tampa, because one of the first contractors that wanted me to come out was a Tampa contractor. So long story short, Bob kind of lent me out to contractors for the next year or so. And it was nice. But the problem is that in order to adopt a world-class quality mentality, you literally have to start from the top and go through what's called Kaizens. It's continuous process improvement every day, or every week, or every month. So Bob was so committed, he literally called a board meeting, and they had a corporate resolution that everyone in that company, there's close to 400 people in the company, was going to be trained in total quality and world-class quality. Any new employee would have to be trained in total quality. And about 6 years later, Bob sold the company for a very large sum of money, but still stuck around. But one of the reasons why, in my opinion, that he got a good value for that company was because of how efficient that man ran that company, and a lot of it, hats off to lean production at that time. I wrote about that in my book, by the way, in one of the chapters about how he systematically went through and restructured his organization.
How many books have you written?
I've written one, and now I'm in the process of writing my second one.
Okay. What was the title of the first one?
The title of the first one was a transformation of a $1 trillion industry. And I published that in 2019. And then I got it up to number 3 on the Amazon list. That's as high as I could get it in the categories of self-help and construction. And then people kept saying, it would be nice if you could put this on tape. So I didn't at the time want to spend the money, because I really didn't do it for the money. I just wrote it because it was on a bucket list, and people kept saying, you really need to write this stuff down and all that kind of good stuff. And so I finally started. It took me 3.5 years to research it all, and write it. And my wife, she's very smart, and she actually was my editor for the first 8 renditions of the book. It's a 242-page book. And, when I got to the 9th, she said, I'm not reading this. You're done. I'm done. You figure it out. So I said, okay, that's fair. And so I wanted to make sure it was a readable book and could be validated in the construction industry predominantly. So there's a gentleman that both I and Joe Knight know, who's also a fascinating gentleman, by the name of Hugh Rice. Hugh used to be the chairman of Fales Management Institute. Now, Dr. Fales, that's his name, Dr. Fales. It's kind of ironic. The guy named Fales is teaching how to be successful in contracting and business. So FMI was based out of Colorado, who, by the way, used to consult with Bob Dorn at Capital Electric. And they also have an operation in Raleigh, North Carolina. But anyway, I had known Hugh through a third party. And my thought is, if I can get Hugh Rice, the chairman of Fales Management, which is the McKinsey of the construction industry, to write the foreword and endorse the book, then I'd have my own personal validation, and we were off and running. So I contacted Hugh, and Hugh said, no, I can't do that because we have our own standards and we have our own bylaws that we're really not in a position to endorse other publications. We have our own publications. And I wish I could help, but I can't. And so I thought, that's a bummer. And so I left it alone for about 2 or 3 months while I was still dusting it off and cleaning it up, since Mary Ann was done after 8 editions of reading it. And but there was a time, and I can tell you this story if you're interested, when in the mid 2007s, have you ever heard of Fisk Electric or Rosendin Electric? It was during the time where SPACs were big, Special Purpose Acquisition Corps were big. And I got a call one day from one of the roll-up guys that I was partnered with back in the mid-90s after I left Bob. And I haven't talked to you about that. And got the call, and it was a guy named Andy Arnold from Fales Management, if you can believe that, in 1996. And long story short, we had put together a team, an acquisition team. We started rolling like everybody else was rolling back in that era. And long story short, moving forward, I got a call in 2007 from a guy named Sid Stanton, who, believe it or not, was the godfather, and still is unfortunately he's passed away, of LBOs, leveraged buyouts, and junk bonds. He used to be with Laird & Co. He used to run Laird & Co. and everybody on Wall Street knew Sid Stanton. Well, Sid at that time was about 70 years old, and he had linked up with some young mavericks. They were basically leveraging Sid's reputation and contacts and all that to create their own private equity fund to go doing consolidations in the especially contracting industry. And so Sid and I got to know each other very well, and back in the mid '90s when this was all going on. Well, anyway, fast forward to 2007, Sid calls me up and says, "Rod, you still got some contacts in the industry that might be willing to be part of a SPAC?" And I said, "Well, first thing, Sid, I'm going to show you my ignorance. You need to explain to me what a SPAC is." So he explained everything. He was a grand gentleman. And I said, I got a couple players that probably will jump at it. And one was Larry Brookshire at Fisk, and another one was Tom Sorley at Rosendin. And a lot of people in the industry don't know this, but we were within a whisker of merging those two companies back in 2007 and 2008. But long story short, that's when I was introduced to Hugh Rice, because Hugh was on the board of both Fisk and Rosendin. And that's when I reference Hugh, 12 years later. He knew exactly who I was and knew exactly what we were talking about in the whole 9 yards. But he's very apologetic, said he really can't do it, blah, blah, blah. And so next thing I know, just by happenstance, another equity partner that was part of our group had just partnered up with someone else and said, "Hey, we're looking for some companies. Can you help us out?" I said, "Well, I probably got some companies, but the guy you really need to talk to is Hugh Rice at Phil's Management, because he knows all these contractors." So I called Hugh up and said, "Hey, Hugh, are you interested in meeting with this private equity group that wants to do a roll up?" And he says, "I'm sure, I'm happy to help anybody." He said, "What are they looking for?" So I explained to him, and he goes, "So how you coming with the book?" And I said, "Well, I got one thing left, Hugh." And he goes, "What's that?" And I said, "The forward. I can't find the right person to write the forward." And he goes, "It sounds like you're angling for me to write it." And I said, "I'm doing my best, Hugh." And he goes, he goes, "Rodney, just send me the manuscript." And I said, he says, if I agree with most of everything you said, he says, I'll put something together. But if I have a problem with it, then I'm not going to do it. He said, "Is that fair?" And I said, "That's fair." Well, Pat, I sent it to him on a Friday, and by that following Sunday morning, I got a text said, "How many words do you need for your forward?" And at that point in time, I knew that the book was a pretty good book from a construction and self-help perspective. So that's the story behind the forward of my book from Hugh Rice. But anyway, long story short, the SPAC between Rosendin and Fisk. Rosendin was an ESOP at the time. Their fiduciary. There was a counter offer from a company called Tudor Perini, who was a publicly traded general contractor. It was an all cash offer, and the fiduciary said, "This is the way I'm going to vote because of the benefit to the employees, the short-term benefit of the employees." And we had the entire organization structure set up. Larry Brookshire was going to be chairman. Tom Sorley was going to be the president, COO. It just went on down from there. And obviously, Brookshire was a majority owner of Fisk, so he had already approved it. And so that's why Fisk and Rosendin are not part of each other to this day. However, when word got out that Fisk and Rosendin were on the market, Fisk got bought up by the same Tudor Perini that made an all-cash offer that fell apart on Rosendin. So now Fisk Electric is part of the Tudor Perini family.
What's Larry doing? Larry
passed away about a year and a half ago. But Tom Sorley is retired. Fascinating guy. But believe it or not, he was the quarterback for Nebraska back in the day. So
I heard that.
In fact, I think Joe knows him. Joe Knipe knows him.
Was there anything that you might like to ask me or say that we haven't talked about today?
Well, at the end of the day, it's been an interesting road for me.
You've done a
Um,
lot, a lot of different
and
things.
one thing I haven't told you, when I joined Encompass, which was one of the big roll-ups at the time, I was the fifth employee of Building One. Building One was one of two companies. Group Mac was the second company that merged in 1999 to become the largest facility service company in the world. $3.6 billion is what we did: janitorial, plumbing, mission critical, electrical, and janitorial. And it was funded by a guy you may know or have heard of, John Ledecky. Remember John Ledecky? Or have you heard of John Ledecky?
I have
Well,
not.
John started. He was the darling of Wall Street. He started a consolidation called U.S. Office Products, and John, at the time, was the fair-haired kid, so-called fair-haired kid, on Wall Street. So he could do no wrong. So when he went out and raised $60 million through a syndicate, he backed Building One, our company, but we were all the roll-ups at the time, Pat. We could talk hours about this. They had over leveraged themselves because there were so many consolidators at the time. They were just jacking up the price, and they became so debt heavy. And then FASB, once our friends at Enron and MCI got caught with their hands in the cookie jar, FASB changed, as you well know. You got Sarbanes-Oxley that came around at the time. And so that really changed the whole landscape of financial reporting for public companies. And when that happened, most of the consolidated companies within Group Mac and Building One went back to their own selves. They dissolved the public companies, and the rest is history. Well, Ledecky decides that he's taking his money and he buys the New York Islanders. His niece is, I can't remember what her first name is the swimmer Ledecky, the Olympian. And so that was my involvement with John Ledecky at the time. But long story short, what I was getting at is through all that consolidation program, we had a minimum of 11,000 pieces of equipment from coast to coast, border to border. And if you remember, a company called eBay and B2B exchanges were starting to become the hot ticket in the .com market, in the .com world. Well, I went to the CEO who I knew, Joe Ivy, and I said, Joe, I've been approached by two big industrial auctioneer houses. They were three of the biggest in North America. One was from Canada, two were from the United States. And they would like to know if we would be interested in being one of their beta sites for asset management and equipment procurement and transfer. And Joe said, Rodney, that's not part of our model, but if you want to be part of that and represent us and make sure we get best value out of it, he goes, have at it. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, what did he just say to me? Did he say, you can keep working here, but you can also be part of that new .com company? And I said, Joe, just to be clear, I don't want to leave Building One. He goes, I'm not telling you to leave. Because at that time, I was a regional VP for Total Site Solutions, which is a mission critical company, silo that we had. And I was heading to Boston to be the president of the New England branch for Encompass. And I said, to be clear, I still want to go to Boston and run that branch and develop that branch. But if you're saying it's okay for me to team up with these guys as a founder, I said, I'd love to be able to do that. And he said, yeah, that's what I'm telling you. But make sure we get best value going forward. So at the end of the day, me and the three auctioneers created a company called equiptomove.com. And in 1999, 2000, We later sold it about a year and a half later to a B2B website that was who was also an auction website, but he was much bigger than we were, and so we cashed out in about 2 years, and it's called equiptomove.com, and that was a great experience, Pat. How we put all that together. It was the early stages of the .com era. eBay was the golden child at the time, and it was just
Still is from my perspective.
And I
love eBay.
We learned a lot from eBay when we were doing it, but they didn't have that online. At the time they had online bidding, but they didn't have online live auction. We would literally go into industrial plants. I'll never forget Kalamazoo, Michigan, huge GM plant, and they were getting rid of all their presses and all their robotics and all that kind of stuff at the time. And we literally had the live auction with remote bidding, and then we set up all the contracting of tearing it down and moving it to a different location, because we had rigging companies and all that kind of stuff within the Encompass world. And so it was a great hand in glove situation at the time. And so some of the stuff that eBay does now, I'd like to say they learned from us, but I don't know. That's just hyperbole at this point. But there's a lot of things that eBay is doing now that we actually did before eBay at equipment.com.
That's neat.
Anyway, that's just a side story.
Well, before we wrap up, is there anything that you might like to say, just looking back on all the things that you've done?
Well, like I said, it's been I'll tell you, the person who has probably influenced me or allowed me to do this the most is Marianne, because we've moved 11 times. This is our 12th time. We've moved to some pretty neat places. I've built projects in some pretty neat places. New Orleans and Baton Rouge was an interesting era. My kids would always come home as they got older and said, "Dad, where's your next project? Dad, where's the next company you're going to go to?" Because they always knew I would go to some pretty neat places, and because they'd love to come to visit. I built a big retirement community in Asheville, North Carolina. Well, that's where the not Smoky Mountains, but the Blue Ridge Mountains are. And every once in a while, you get a whole bunch of snow. They weren't used to snow because they grew up in the South, and they hadn't seen a whole bunch of snow. They saw a bunch of snow in Kansas City, but they were too young to appreciate it. And so, they love come up snowboarding and all that kind of stuff. I rented a place up on Wolf Creek Mountain, which is about 30 minutes from Asheville. So they'd come up, spend a weekend. We'd go hiking and all that kind of stuff. But in any event, Marianne, God love her, she's been a trooper, and she retired about 11 years ago. It hasn't looked back as a nurse, and but she's allowed me to do what I do, and she keeps asking me. She used to keep asking me. Now she's quit. When are you going to retire? But she knows I love what I'm doing, so it's going to be a while before I hang it up.
My suspicion is you'll go as long as there's gas in the tank.
That's exactly right.
Well,
anything else you need to know from me, Pat?
No, I'm just delighted to be in touch with you, and I hope we have an ongoing conversation, and I'll let you know when this is posted and follow up with you in a couple weeks to say hello.
Excellent. If you need any help from me, Pat, you've got my number. Feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to do whatever I can to help you.
Thank you, sir. Have a great day.
Thanks, Pat.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You were great. If you enjoy the most fascinating podcast in the world, please follow on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, and follow on Apple Podcast.